Committee have called what happened at the U.S. Capitol almost 2 years ago as Donald Trump pushed for a continuation of his presidency in the face of election results proving that he had been defeated. With the committee talking about criminal referrals for a man now running for president again, is that what Americans want to see happen? Is that what should happen? Questions we're putting to our political analyst, Democrat Ed Emerson and Republican Tab Berg. Gentlemen, good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning.
The session that just wrapped up in Washington is now the 11th public meeting of the January 6th committee since July of 2021. More than 20 million people viewed at least one of those hearings. Has it all become just too tedious? Are people still paying attention? Tab, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the American people have moved on. I think a lot of them saw from the beginning this was a very partisan committee, that it was more about politics than about finding the truth or about improving or protecting elections.
Ed, what's your take on this? Tab is saying this is very, very partisan. The fact of the matter is that there were words said encouraging people to go to a particular place where the Capitol building was eventually breached and Capitol police officers were hurt.
Well, the one word I didn't hear today, which I'm dying to hear, is treason. Insurrection, violent overthrow of the government. I mean, those points were made. The hearings for May is nothing new. I mean, we've known this stuff for quite some time. Indict Teflon Don. John Gotti had a reputation as a mob boss that couldn't get indicted. Donald Trump is the same. I'm not going to be happy, and Democrats in this country, in your audience here, are not going to be happy until he's got a coat over his head, in handcuffs, being put in the back of a state trooper's car. I mean, the guy has, lying's not a crime, apparently, or advocating people to overthrow the government. So I was disappointed in the hearings in that regard.
Okay. Now, if Democrats still controlled both chambers in Congress, any chance this hearing would be happening today? It seems kind of strange timing. I know it was fast, just an hour, right, but it's the week leading up to Christmas. It's an understatement to say that there is divided attention nationwide. Is this closing argument being presented really being heard by the target audience, Ed?
Well, I think it's the same people. It's folks like myself and in some instances, Tab is. We have to pay attention. We still do. We always will. And we are filters and redisseminators of this information. I mean, people need to know that Donald Trump incited this, encouraged people to go to the Capitol. People died at the Capitol. And we saw what they did to the Capitol Police. Those people, those folks, those oath keepers and Proud Boys and the other racists involved with this are in prison. They're getting sentenced to prison. I'm not sure how many yet, but maybe 100 people who were involved in this insurrection have been sentenced to federal prison already. And the sentences are just getting longer as these trials play out.
Tab, is the target audience hearing this, or is this just a weird timing because this committee obviously loses control in just a few short days?
That's right.
Well, I mean, clearly they're playing to their base and trying to keep this as an issue that's alive. But I think the American people recognize, the broader participation of the public is not there. The original formation of the committee absolutely disregarded Republicans based on the fact that they voted for not to seat certain electors, but the chairman of the committee, Bernie Thompson, voted not to seat electors in previous elections. So I think people saw this as very much as political theater. There was no information, no new real information that was disclosed, and the committee doesn't have any sort of legal authority. While prosecutors did prosecute, over 480 people have been prosecuted. Wow. Who did participate in illegal things. And I think this is the kind of thing that the American public sees, that we would like to see law enforcement take care of it and put bad guys away, and people who did things wrong should be investigated by the Department of Justice, the FBI, or local police and sentenced accordingly. And this is for Congress to engage in this. I think the American people clearly see it as nothing more than political theater.
All righty. Now, we've had more than 1,000 witnesses, some with just sending tidbits to share, like being in the limo with the president and hearing him ask to go to the Capitol as riders were starting to break in and staff talking him down and kind of redirecting him. We know what they were trying to interrupt that day was a certification of the Electoral College count. Part of what the committee has been doing has been talking about sort of revamping the Electoral Count Act, seeking to upgrade that law governing how states and Congress certify electors and declare presidential election winners, ensuring that the popular vote from each state can't be manipulated. Now, Ed, what's your feeling about that particular portion of the committee's work? Is that what we should be doing?
Absolutely. I think we should get rid of the Electoral College. I think majority rules is the sense of any democracy and the sense of any government by, for, and about the people of the United States. We've been subverted in that regard. The Electoral College is anachronistic, which is a hard word to say.
It is.
And I think, myself personally, it should go away.
Okay, and then Tab, what do you think about the Electoral Count Act and the changes they're seeking to make?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you generally see with political reform is one party or another trying to give themselves an advantage. And as soon as that advantage goes away, they're going to be calling for a different kind of reform. So I don't think wholesale changing of our Constitution is actually warranted. We should be working on how do we protect the integrity of elections? How do we ensure the peaceful transition of power, not playing political games to give an advantage to one party or another.
All righty, some would say we ensure the peaceful transition of power by respecting what the voters did and not pressuring a vice president to change the Electoral College vote. Others would say that the people who were out there rioting would need to have their voices heard just as well. Of course, this is a debate that will continue not only here, but across our country for many, many years to come. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us on this historic day as, you know, criminal referrals have been made for the president and also for members of Congress. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cecilia. Thanks, Tab.
Thanks, Ed.